Coming up, the curse of the President's Trophy continues. This is Locked On Game to Game, NHL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NHL. Local experts join us to go over the playoff matchups from last night in the National Hockey League. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The Florida Panthers shocked the hockey world on Sunday by beating the Bruins in Boston in Game 7. For the Panthers, they knocked out the best regular season team in NHL history in the first round of the playoffs. Our Locked On local experts have more after a historic win for Florida.
The greatest upset in Stanley Cup postseason history belongs to the Florida Panthers. What is up, guys? It's Armando Velez from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and the Florida Panthers defeat the Boston Bruins by a final score of 4-3 on the road in overtime. And 3 of your 4 wins come on the road at TD Garden, where the Boston Bruins only lost 4 times in regulation all season. And the Florida Panthers were that one of 2 teams in the regular season to defeat the Boston Bruins twice. And they did it in 4 out of 7 games in a playoff series. And yes, the penalty kill was not great for the Panthers in this series, as they gave up 11 power play goals to the Boston Bruins, but they did it with their even strength play and timely goaltending. That was the key for the Florida Panthers, consistently pinning the Boston Bruins in their own zone, and the advantage in the takeaways and giveaways was in the Florida Panthers' favor. And the 3 stars of the series for the Florida Panthers, Matthew Tkachuk, Brandon Montour, and Carter Verhaeghe. Those were the 3 guys who stepped up the most in this series. And they did it without Captain Alexander Barkov not having his best series as well. But it's going to need to be a little better, as now they're going to be taking on the Toronto Maple Leafs in round 2. So listen to my recap of this 4-3 overtime win for the Florida Panthers and completing the greatest upset in Stanley Cup postseason history. Make sure to listen to my next episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Your team every day.
Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand hugging tearfully before leaving the ice after a Game 7 loss to the Florida Panthers is an image I won't soon forget. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and after a historic regular season where they recorded the most wins and most points in NHL history, the Boston Bruins are out after a round 1 loss to the Florida Panthers, dropping Game 7 on home ice in overtime after holding the lead with less than a minute remaining in regulation. Just a complete and utter disappointment, shock, and it's going to be quite an interesting offseason for the Boston Bruins, possibly the end of an era. And just keep it locked to Locked On Boston Bruins for all the developments with the black and gold.
The Kraken continues Sunday's craziness by eliminating the reigning champion Avalanche in Game 7 as well. Our Locked On hosts recap after Seattle won the franchise's first ever playoff series.
The Seattle Kraken win their first ever playoff series over the defending champions, the Colorado Avalanche. We win with a score of 2-1. I'm Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, and I had to hold on to biscuit for what felt like the last 10 minutes of the third period. Amazing play by Philip Grubauer. 31 saves, only let that one get past, and there was an excellent screen by Colorado. Once again, offsides determined an overturned goal for the Colorado Avalanche. Stick taps to the video crew for the Seattle Kraken. And then, of course, there was Oliver Bjorkstrand. Gets credit for both goals. One that bounced off a few Avalanche players. And then the second one, just a great play along the board to poke that free. Bjorkstrand doesn't miss, goes top shelf. Actually, I think he hit mid post and then it tinkered top shelf. Anyway, we did it. We're going on to play the Dallas Stars. Look for some Squadcast crossover episodes, and we will continue to have our live reaction shows. But most importantly, we'll get you ready for everything you need to know for the first ever round 2 of the playoffs for the Seattle Kraken. That's coming up on Monday's episode of Locked On Kraken.
All right, the Colorado Avalanche season comes to an end after a 2-1 loss to the Seattle Kraken in Game 7 at home in Colorado. And the two things that people will be talking about for this game, an offsides call and Philip Grubauer. Philip Grubauer was spectacular in this game, and the Avalanche threw everything that they could at him, and he was up for the task. They did seem to crack him a little bit at the end of the second, where they got a power play goal, and then early in the third, you had a game-tying goal, but it got called back because of an offsides by Arturi Lehkonen. You got to feel for Arturi Lehkonen today, but he was offsides. It was the right call, and the Avalanche couldn't put another one past Grubauer. So that's it. The Stanley Cup will be in a new city for this season, and for the Avalanche, it is going to be an off season of questions. There's a lot of unrestricted free agents that they have to sign. So I think your top players are they're under contract. They're not going anywhere. But this team might have a very different look to it next year, because a lot of those unrestricted free agents, they either won't be back because of age, because of performance, or because the Avalanche just can't afford them. So one way or another, it will be a different looking Avalanche team. They will still be in the mix for a strong playoff push if they can just stay healthy. That was the big issue for this year for the Avalanche, is they were hardly ever a healthy team. And to do what they did and win the division, you got to give them a pat on the back for that. But the season's over, and now you look forward already to next year.
That's a wrap for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NHL. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NHL and your favorite team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.